Hello and welcome to another Drawing with Jason tutorial with me, Jason Rose. Today we're going to be drawing an iguana. Here's the picture that I'm going to be copying. Maybe you can print this out so you can work on it at the same time as me. So here we go. So I'm starting off fairly sketchy. I'm not pressing too hard with the pencil. I don't want these lines to be too rigid. I may have to alter them and change them as I go along. What I'm doing is I'm using my eyes and I'm looking at the shapes. I'm not just looking at it as a lizard with eyes, a tongue and a mouth. I'm looking at it as a series of shapes, because everything is made up of shapes. And it's much easier to draw something when you look at it as a series of shapes. So the first shape that I've looked at, and I'm going to show it to you now, there you go. That's the shape that my eyes have been observing, above the eye. Now I'm using my rubber. I'm really focusing on the eye now, and I'm looking at the shapes inside the eye, because there are shapes within shapes. Pressing a little bit harder in the darker areas, and I'm looking at the shapes around the eye as well. Now I'm looking at something called contrast. As you can see behind the iguana, it's very dark. So I'm going to make my drawing very dark behind the iguana. And what is happening is that the outlines are disappearing. If you can see the outlines around the top of the iguana, they've disappeared into the background. Because in real life, things don't have outlines. The next shape I'm looking at is this shape. The shape underneath the eye, this kind of long snake-like shape. I'm doing a little bit of shading. I'm using my finger. Now I'm using my rubber. Remember, rubbers aren't just for getting rid of mistakes. They're also for rubbing in the light. I'm now putting in some details. And I'm not going to draw every single scale. That would just be impossible and a bit laborious. So I'm just putting in a few scales. Sometimes that's all you need. I'm now looking at the shape of the tongue. I'm shading it and putting in more contrast. That should make it stand out a little bit more 3D. Now I'm working down his face. Now I'm working on that dark line under his mouth. It's a little bit like bricks, just getting these kind of like long dark scales. Now I'm going to get the shape, this other really big shape now underneath his mouth and then above his chin. There you go. That's that shape that I'm looking at now. Now I'm looking at another big shape, a kind of triangular shape to the left of his eye, right to the end of his head. There you go, that shape now, like a fan kind of shape on its side. And that's how I work. I'm building things up as shapes, big shapes and then the smaller shapes. I'm putting in a little bit more texture, some of these lines, a little bit more shading to make it look a bit more 3D. And now I'm kind of putting in some of the scales, the really visible scales, kind of on his bottom jaw. It's like drawing a wall, really. It's like brickwork. Using my finger a lot to smudge the pencil with. I'm just working into the shading now, just going over the drawing I've already done just to enhance the shading a little bit more. You can keep coming back to things. You don't have to finish it completely as you're going along. I keep coming back to things I've already drawn and now making the mouth a bit darker inside the mouth. Now I'm going to move away from the face. I'm going to come back to the face a little bit later. Now I'm kind of just working on the rest of the body. Again, fairly sketchy. I can always tidy it up afterwards if it's a bit too messy. Or like that, I sometimes turn the lines into shadows. makes this big circular shape here, surrounded by these kind of little scales around it. I'm still looking at the shapes sort of the lines. You get lots of triangular shapes in humans and animals. Now, as you can see, really slow down, you can see that I'm using my rubber to sculpt some of those spines at the top of his back. So sometimes you can sketch things out with a pencil, sometimes you can draw them with a rubber if you've got enough pencil there in the first place. It can be a very effective way of drawing.
Remember, I've speeded up the film. My hands don't quite go this fast in real life.
Now I'm working on the what you call negative space, the shape between his claws, that dark shape between his claws there. That helps me get the shape of his claws. Now I'm actually drawing some of the texture of his claws, some of that really nice scale kind of pattern. Getting some of these lines and folds in. Now I'm looking at the shape of his leg. There's lots of shading here, lots and lots of shading. I'm putting my pencil flat down and cross hatching left to right, and getting the contrast, so that lovely dark contrast behind his leg, that makes his leg and kind of really stand out. But now I want to put some of the texture into it, and there's a lot of different ways of doing this. I don't want to actually draw every single scale, so I've done a kind of crisscross network to begin with, but there are other ways of getting that texture. This is another way of using my rubber, dabbing my rubber. I'll show you in slow motion again, dabbing my rubber on top of my shading, and that also helps give me the scaly effect, like the light reflecting on the scales. So you can build up textures in many different ways. Going back to using my rubber again for his spines on top of his back. Using my fingers, I do get very messy when I draw. I always have to wash my hands afterwards, otherwise I get fingerprints everywhere. The way that I'm shading his back now will give me the feeling of lots and lots and lots of scales. The crisscrossy way that I just shaded his back. I'm looking at a little bit of detail there. And now I'm actually drawing in some of those big spikes on his back. Some of the detail can be very what you call impressionistic. Like I showed you, you use all these clever techniques to give the illusion of lots of detail. But sometimes you can actually draw some individual bits of detail in as well. So you can draw some individual scales on top of the more impressionistic scales. Now, what I'm doing now is I'm just putting the finishing touches. I've more or less got the drawing, but now I'm going back into it and I'm darkening up the dark areas, and by pressing really hard, like especially in the cracks of his mouth there, and in his eye, and in some of these lines, and now I'm using my rubber for the highlights as well. See, I'm getting that highlight just on the top ridge of his lower mouth there. I'm putting in a few more scales, just to give the feeling that there's lots and lots of scales without drawing every single one. And so this is now just putting the finishing touches. I'm not going for perfection. I'm keeping it fairly sketchy around the edges. I'm allowing lots of lines and mistakes to stay in. Another highlight there on that part of his leg. And there we go. A finished drawing of the iguana. There we go. I think if I finished it off too perfectly, it wouldn't have any movement or life. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching me draw the iguana. I certainly enjoyed drawing it. Remember though, I just need to say that you don't have to draw exactly like me. All artists have their own individual, unique kind of style, their own way of shading and holding the pencil, and hopefully you'll find your own individual style. But also hopefully you've found some tips that may help you as well out of watching me draw. Yes, so enjoy drawing your iguana. Maybe when you've finished, your mum or dad can send me an image of your finished drawing. It'd be lovely to see. And I will be doing more animal drawing tutorials, so look out for them, and keep well, and all the best, and bye bye.